Well, as we just mentioned, many of the News Limited papers have endorsed a Rudd Labor government, but not all of them by any means. The Adelaide Advertiser is one from the Murdoch stable to endorse the government. It says it's not time for change and no issue is more important than the economy. Foreign Affairs Minister Alexander Downer joins us from his hometown in Adelaide. Minister, good morning.
Good morning, Fran. I hope everyone reads the Advertiser today.
Well, you better get it out there, I guess. Today's Galaxy poll, Minister, shows an enormous comeback for the government. But the trend, obviously, has been, in Newspoll and Nielsen, is that you're headed for defeat. Where do you see it?
Well, we'll wait and see tomorrow. I think, though, and this is my experience from going around my electorate just during the course of yesterday and in the pubs in my electorate last night. I mean, I think people are very focused now on the whole issue of the economy. You know, the government's been there for a long time, but the economy's going well. People have got jobs. You've seen an enormous decline in unemployment. Probably jobs is the very biggest single benefit that people have got out of economic reform in recent times. And I'm not sure at the end of the day whether people really will risk the change. I've always said that. It's a very, very big risk to get rid of a government that has provided such a strong economy and replace it with an untested group of people. And as you know, 70% of their front bench are former trade union officials. So,
but just going back to the polls, I mean, basically what you're saying is you don't believe the polls. You don't believe that trend line we've been seeing for months now.
Look, I don't think that what the polls say is important. I think at the end of the day, the decision that people make is what's important. There's all sorts of debate about polls, and the polls vary a bit. I mean, I could quote to you, for example, a very interesting poll today, which is it's called a census poll of small business, and it shows a dramatic decline in confidence of small business, and the main reason for that is that they're concerned about a potential change of government. And, you know, that is obviously for small and medium-sized business a real issue. They are very worried that there would be a change of government and the consequences for the economy. I just mention that not because I place enormous weight on polls, but because the people who've been polled here are the people who employ Australians. And those people are worried about a change of government, and that plays exactly into my point, which is people will worry about their jobs and the uncertainty in terms of their living standards if there's a change of government to the unknown.
Minister, you're a seasoned politician. Do you believe the coalition has had a good campaign in 2007?
Well, the ultimate test of that will be the result of the election, I think. I'll leave that to the public, not to me. I mean, I'm not a commentator. I'm part of the government. And I think you'll agree
that yesterday was a disaster for the government. Do you think the fiasco in Lindsay will damage the coalition vote in some critical, perhaps inner urban seats around Sydney?
I guess what didn't impress me, like everybody, was the flyer. What impressed me was the decisive way the Prime Minister dealt with it. I mean, I thought he was extraordinarily effective. I mean, people aren't silly. They know that the Prime Minister, people like me and Peter Costello and the like, we'd never endorse that sort of behaviour. So a lot of people are playing it up to the best of their ability because they hope that by doing so it damages the government. I mean, we just heard Michelle Grattan rabbiting on about it 2 mornings in a row with great excitement and breathlessly hoping it'll damage the government. But look, at the end of the day, I think the way John Howard has dealt with it and the way it's been dealt with demonstrates a strength of purpose and that we just completely dissociate ourselves from and reject that kind of behaviour.
Well, Minister, I'm not sure that I'd describe Michelle Grattan's delivery as breathless, and certainly has been a major issue, not just on this program, but most places for the last 2 days. But if we look...
Yeah, but people like to, I mean, you said I was a seasoned politician. Trust me. People who don't like the government anyway are making an absolute meal of it because they hope it will damage the government. I mean, I've been around long enough to know that, honestly.
Minister, I was at a function last night where people from both sides of politics were there, and a lot of people were saying that the leadership transition has been an issue and a negative for the government in this campaign. You were concerned enough to go to the Prime Minister a couple of months ago to talk about handing over. In hindsight, was it a mistake for the Liberal Party to not make a leadership change earlier this year?
No, and I think what we did do coming out of that is make an arrangement for the transition, which will happen if we win the election during the life of the next parliament, late into the life of the next parliament. And, you know, we're being upfront with people. We're saying, unlike the Victorian Labor Party at the last Victorian election, or the Queensland Labor Party at the last Queensland election, vote for Bracks, vote for Beattie, and then, of course, they left unexpectedly. In this case, we're saying to people, John Howard will be the Prime Minister if we win the election, but late in the term, Peter Costello will take over. Peter Costello is the most experienced treasurer in history, but it's not just a question of experience, it's a question of record too. Here is a man who's controlled the levers of our $1.1 trillion economy for a long time, and has done it incredibly successfully.
Okay, but if you lose, if you took the wrong gamble, Peter Costello may not get a chance, won't get a chance perhaps to be Prime Minister of this country. What is the fate of the Liberal Party if you lose? Because the Brisbane Lord Mayor would be the most senior Liberal in power across this country. That's a sign of a pretty sick party, isn't it?
Well, I think there's a bigger issue than the fate of the Liberal Party, and that's the fate of the country. I mean, handing over the country in the situation Australia is in today to a bunch of unknowns who have skated through this election campaign, particularly Mr Rudd has skated through this election campaign on a series of slogans. Just repeating slogans over and over again, which have been work-tested and written out for him by somebody else. He's memorised the slogans. I mean, I give him credit for memory. He's memorised 10 slogans, or 10 or so slogans, and repeated them over and over and over again. And then suddenly he wakes up on Sunday morning and he's in charge of a $1.1 trillion economy. I suspect he wouldn't have any idea what to do. I noticed last weekend in a newspaper Mr Rudd saying, well, if he wins the election, he'd like to consult Mr Howard. In other words, he'd like to continue to follow Mr Howard's policies. Well, the fact is Mr Howard will be out of office. Mr Rudd will be on his own running the economy with his trade union bosses. And that's what worries me for Australia, not what would happen to the Liberal Party.
Well, Minister, on that note, win or lose, thank you very much for joining us today, and thanks for always being available for this program.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you in the mornings, Fran.
He always fronts up. Alexander Downer, Foreign Minister.